Her Sport Rugby Show, brought to you by Energia. Think of the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Her Sport's Interpro Rugby Show, brought to you in association with Energia. Think of the possibilities. My name is Alana Canan and I'll be bringing you today through round 2 of the action, and I'm joined with former Irish international Hannah Tyrrell. You're here to guide me through it all, Hannah.
Yeah, look, big weekend of rugby just passes by. A lot of talking points on and off the pitch. So yeah, it sets us up for the final round next weekend nicely.
As you say, we had a big weekend of rugby. Munster's 26-17 win over Leinster and Connacht's 25-19 victory over Ulster. There was big crowds and atmosphere at the games. It looked like watching on TG Caher anyways. Are we starting to kind of get the coverage the product deserves of women's rugby?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think there's obviously still a long way to go with women's rugby with regards to getting the product out there and showing people what skill level and talent is on show. But having the likes of TG Caher and also BBC Northern Ireland showcasing these games and putting them on for people who physically can't attend is a fantastic way to showcase the talent we have. And yeah, look, they were treated to some fantastic games the weekend.
And you could see the fans, a lively atmosphere at Musgrave Park over the weekend. That's now the venue for the Women's Six Nations. Do you think that's the right call? Yeah,
look, I think what the RFU are trying to do is, again, showcase this really good brand of rugby that we're trying to play. And you know, in previous years, long before we were using Energia Stadium, we were up in Ashbourne. You know, and I remember one year, one of my first seasons playing with the Irish team, like the floodlights went out there one night, you know, and while Ashbourne were doing everything they could, you know, to get it back on, there was a massive delay. And for people having trekked out there, and I think it was a Friday night game as well, it's quite a difficult game to get to, and we want to make this as accessible as possible. So as well as being on the TV and giving people coverage, giving so many people different opportunities to get to games. And last year we had it in the Kingspan and one in the RDS and then also in Musgrave, which was great, giving people from loads of different provinces an opportunity to get to the game. This year we only have 2 home games, so it is a little bit more difficult, I suppose. It's great to see games in Musgrave Park. I also would have loved to see a game maybe either in the sports ground or again up in Kingspan, just to spread it around a little bit and give people more opportunities to get there. But I think it's a great idea, and the idea behind all of it is really good, and I can see what they're well intentioned. I just hope now we get the crowds to back that up.
And do you think we will?
I hope so, yeah. Look, again, I think there's been a lot of media and support for the Irish women's team, particularly over the last year and everything that's happened. So, you know, I hope people, you know, don't just speak the words and actually get bums on seats to support these girls.
And sticking then with the Irish women's rugby team for a second, they've decided to move away from the white shorts. I think it's as of next year. What do you kind of think of that decision?
Yeah, look, obviously, you know, we all know that women suffer with periods and that can be a hugely stressful and uncomfortable time, and then bring in that some girls may be much younger than others and be very, very nervous about it. I think it's a great move, and they're not the first team to do it. There's been a number of women's football teams and stuff like that. I'll be interested to see how nice the navy looks, because I will say, having played in the white shorts myself, they do get dirty and they're very hard to clean, but also the white looks really nice against the green, so it'll be interesting to see what the shorts look like and how they fit well with the jersey. But look, it's a positive step, it's a really good step, and I'm sure for all those players who are looking forward and hoping to play in the Six Nations, I'm sure that they're very happy with it.
Definitely. And then finally, there was a bit of news that broke this morning that possibly the IRFU are looking at Meath's Vicky Wall. Yourself playing for Dublin, a big rival in that capacity, but what would you kind of think if Vicky was to play rugby?
Yeah, look, I suppose obviously I don't know her thinking behind that or whether she'd be interested or not, but from someone who also was enticed into rugby from a GAA background, you know, it was I had been playing club rugby already, so it was a little bit different, but it was a fantastic opportunity to, you know, to play semi-professional rugby and travel the world and, you know, all this sort of stuff. And those opportunities don't come around very often, so I can totally understand anyone who'd be willing to try that. And I do think Vicky was a fantastic athlete and actually would be very well suited to the game. Whether it happens or not, I've no idea. But what I also hope is that the RFU don't just focus on bringing in players from other sports, but because there are plenty of really good and talented young women and girls playing around Ireland, you know, who maybe are at smaller clubs or haven't been noticed yet. I hope they put funds and scouts out to try and find these gems and develop these players that are already actually playing. And yes, look, if we get the likes of players like Vicky Wall to come on board, then that's fantastic, and sure, we'll see what happens.
And like obviously as well, she has the AFLW string to her bow. Now yourself, Sarah Rowe, maybe Vicky Wall. There seems to be a bit of a theme of multi-sport capacity among Irish women's sports people.
I suppose that's Gaelic football for you, that it incorporates so many different skills that are very transferable to other sports. Like for myself, and I know some are similar to Sarah Rowe, is that we played lots of different sports growing up, you know, and Sarah Rowe played Gaelic football and soccer as well. Like I would have played soccer, GA, and then obviously got into rugby, and they're very much transferable from each other, and a lot of it is obviously working on that skill and having the discipline to want and desire to want to work on the skill for the new sport, but also like, do you have the mentality to be able to switch sports and stuff like that? And we've seen that with those, and likes of Vicky going off to the AFLW, like, you know, she's done really well over there. So, you know, who knows? I'm sure she has plenty of decisions and offers around the place from various different sports, because she is such an incredible athlete. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Definitely, one to keep an eye on anyways. So moving on then to the action from the weekend, the second round of games, of course. Munster, Leinster at Musgrave Park. Munster eventually coming out with the win, 26-17. Hard fought battle though. Yeah, look, this was the game of the weekend. If you were going to go to one of these two games, most people probably would have looked at the Munster-Leinster game and realised that this would be a tasty battle, and we're probably going to see the winners of the Interpro series from this. Both teams coming into the game having won their first match, but both having won it in very different circumstances. Munster's first game coming out of the blocks in the first half, really strong start and asserting their dominance and physicality on Ulster. Leinster took a little bit longer to get into their game against Connacht, really were pushed all the way a little bit, but finally broke their resilience and ended in a comfortable win. The game in Musgrave Park, conditions were pretty good for the start, very cold but otherwise dry. It did rain a little bit during the game, but it was actually Leinster this time who came out really tenacious, kind of putting Munster on the back foot, almost like they weren't expecting it a little bit, and they got the first score through Jenny Murphy, and they looked really good. But as kind of time went on, Munster started to get a stranglehold in the game. They got the next couple of scores, and unfortunately, Leinster's discipline and poor work at the breakdown really cost them, and they had an awful lot of knock-ons and turnovers and couldn't really do anything with the possession that they had, whereas Munster, pushed by their incredible back row there, Dorothy Wall, Dervla Nicovard and Maeve O'Leary, really got that forward pack working, and Dervla Nicovard scored her third try of the series to kind of get Munster back on track, and they just started to push on and got the next score to Roisin Ormond. Really clever pick and go right in the line. And Leinster, looking back at the game, will be absolutely kicking themselves because they had opportunities and didn't really take the most of the chances they had, and didn't even create enough chances, but almost handed Munster so many opportunities to score. And when you have a team like Munster, who, as I said, have that really dominant back row, they have a good 9-10 partnership, and then, you know, some electric players on the wing, they're going to punish you, and they did. And while the scoreline probably glossed it over things a little bit, with Stephanie Carroll going over for the bonus point try right at the end, it was probably very well deserved for Munster, and judging by the celebrations, they were obviously very happy with the win, but there was probably a lot of a sigh of relief in there too. But that game showed why they were defending champs, and unfortunately Leinster just came up short a little bit. Yeah, and as you say there, the rocky start when Jenny Murphy went over the line first, but then there was an iffy few kind of set plays from Leinster, the line-outs, and even I saw Tanya Rosser in today's paper, as you mentioned, touching on the discipline. Is that something that they'll need to work on going forward now? Yeah, look, obviously they'll be really disappointed and looking to finish this Interpro series on a high, and there's still a chance they can end up winning the series. So, you know, they have to go into this next game fully focused on that and trying to rack up a big score essentially, and see if that can help them. But they'll be really disappointed with their line out. It massively malfunctioned and practically threw away possession. And Jess Keating, I'm not sure whether it was problems from the hooker with the throw, or was it a miscommunication with the lift, but like Jess Keating and Aoife McDermott both will have hopes of getting into this Six Nations squad, will be really bitterly disappointed and trying to figure out how they can fix that for the next game. And again, Leinster were probably just bullied a little bit by Munster around the breakdown. You know, Derv Nicovard on the other edge is an absolute menace.
She'll happily go and tackle all she wants, but she would much rather be trying to poach the ball, and so she kind of sniffs around a little bit looking for a chance, and then if you give her that chance, she's going to take it. And unfortunately, Leinster couldn't deal with that and weren't quick enough to the breakdown and got turned over quite a lot from that. And yeah, it'll be something that if I was Ulster, I'd be targeting that area for next week. Or this week.
Possibly one of the biggest talking points in the game anyways came 37 minutes in, a yellow card for Jenny Murphy on a tackle on Aoife Corey. What did you kind of think of that decision? Yeah,
look, I spoke about this at the time, and it's a hard one to judge because the referee has to see this in real time. So for some reason, I'm not entirely sure myself, there was no TMO available, so there was no replay or anything else. And that's quite difficult, and it was quite difficult for a lot of the Leinster players to comprehend at the time on pitch, because a lot of them would be used to playing at a higher level, like with Ireland, and they would have the TMO to turn to. So they were quite frustrated. Personally, I think the ref got it wrong. Having watched it in live and then also replays and even still images, Aoife Corey is still technically in possession of the ball when Jenny Murphy hits her. Do we know that Jenny Murphy is a hard hitter? Absolutely, but she was well within the laws and the rights of the game to make that tackle. She was not high. It was, in my opinion, perfectly timed, and that could have been a big momentum shift for Leinster. They were trying to get back in the game. The clearance from Aoife Corey ended up being really, really poor, and it would have given Leinster an opportunity towards the end of the half in the Munster 22 to set up an attacking platform, and instead they lose a vital and pivotal player for 10 minutes. And right at the start of the second half, things massively can change, and like in that period, Munster score, and that's really, really unfortunate for Leinster, and I'm sure that's something that they obviously wish they can change. But as we said, ref has to make that decision along with his linesperson in real time, and they didn't have the benefit of the TMO or replays like we did.
Yeah, quite a strange decision, as you say, that there wasn't a TMO, given like we've seen it in the AIL final, and then as well in the same venue, Musgrave Park, it's been used for URC matches, I believe. So just kind of a pity that it wasn't enacted there.
Absolutely, and like I said, like that could have been the changing of the game, and unfortunately that's sport, and like referees are human too. We have to understand that, and that they will make mistakes, and as I said, didn't have that TMO to rely on. So they made that decision. Leinster had to deal with it, and unfortunately, I wonder, did it affect their mentality a little bit? And instead of going, right, we can do this with 14 players, was in the back of the mind that they've been unfairly or harshly judged.
Yeah, and even you had touched on earlier, the back row were superb for Munster. Maeve O'Leary with the player of the match. You were talking to her on the day, but is that who you would have gone with, and why do you think?
Yeah, look, I think, as I said, the Munster back row were a standout so far in the two games, but even right from the start of the game, Maeve O'Leary was putting in tackles, trying to jackal or disrupt the breakdown, but she also had some lovely touches and a couple of breaks up the line, and she'll be disappointed with her yellow card. Well, she is disappointed. I spoke to her after the game. She felt she again was harshly judged by the referee. She got a yellow card for changing her binder, so the referee thinks she disagreed and felt she came through the middle. But again, again, she, she's always going to say that what she was doing was right, but she was quite frustrated with that. Nevertheless, for her, it didn't affect the result too much, because at that point when she got the yellow card, Leinster were kind of on a roll a little bit, and it was still very, very tight, but they managed to get out of it. I thought she was super. She's going to be in the Six Nations squad, I've no doubt about it, but even now, even with her good performances, I don't know if I can see her getting a jersey. Right. I'd love to be wrong in that, because I think she's a super player, but our back row is just so stacked at the minute. But I definitely think she had a fantastic game, and Dervla Nicavard, I think will be in that Six Nations squad, or at least deserves to be. And there was a fantastic battle there between Hannah O'Connor, who's also competing in that squad. So Greg McWilliams was at the game. I'm sure he took an awful lot of notes, and it'll have a bearing on his decision. But yeah, look, I'd love to see Dervla Nicavard in a green jersey, and I think Maeve O'Leary deserves a chance based off her performances.
And even when you were chatting to her afterwards, she was saying that Niamh Briggs during the week had got them to write down what it meant to them to play for Munster. I thought that was kind of fascinating. Like, how much in a high performance setup like that does that goal setting play into things?
I think it depends on your coaching setup and the management that you have and the values they place on that kind of stuff. But like, I think anybody who knows about this Munster squad and people from Munster, they are absolute diehards and they've massive pride in their province, and they would do anything for them. And you could tell from that game that they are this massive group with this huge, great sense of friendship and unity and everything else, and that comes out in their play. And yeah, for that goal setting, it works for some people, and other people maybe don't see the value of it. But Maeve O'Leary obviously did, you know, and that came to fruition for her, which is great.
You talk about there kind of the bond amongst the squad. You could especially see it when Clodagh O'Halloran proposed to Chloe Pearce. Were you kind of there for that moment? Did you see it play out?
Yeah, I was actually doing an interview at the time with Niamh Briggs, who just said those two just got engaged, and I was like, oh, I don't know, like this is crazy. But yeah, look, obviously a really heartwarming moment, and so great to see, and great that the footage was captured on TV so that they can have it forever, you know. But look, Clodagh and Chloe have been going out a while now, and they are two absolute diehard Munster supporters, you know, and they've been involved with the province for so many years. They're also diehard Limerick supporters, but
you won't hold that against them.
Look, it's not their fault. But look, you know, Claude has been brilliant with Chloe, who again has been on the fringes and in and out of Ireland squad the last few years, and like, you know, for them to be able to feel like they could do that, not only in front of their teammates, but in front of a crowd and everything else, is fantastic to see. And like, I've always talking about how inclusive rugby is, and that's not just for, you know, male and female, but for all shapes and sizes, but also from a sexuality standpoint, you know, and that just kind of highlights that and how comfortable they were in doing that. You know, and as I said, the images we saw from Info over the last couple of days have been absolutely amazing. And look, it's great news, and it's great for them to be able to, on top of their celebrations, do this, and they can now start planning for what will be a brilliant next chapter in their lives.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter, I can't quite remember who it was, but crouch, touch, pause, engage.
I saw that, it was brilliant, and I don't know, I think everybody saw as well, just cropped on the edge of that image was the very emotional Fee Hayes again, summing up just kind of that unity, that friendship. Like, a lot of those Munster girls will have known each other a very long time and would be very much friends on and off the pitch. So that was a big deal, and I'm sure they were delighted to be involved in that. And clearly Fee Hayes hadn't a clue what was happening, you know, and she was very, very touched by it, but it's great.
And she actually gave insight. I heard in a podcast there earlier this week that afterwards they were chatting, and they'd asked Niamh Briggs beforehand, could they do this? But Fiona was saying they wouldn't have done it had they lost. It was strictly if they were to win.
Yeah, look, I think obviously if they had a loss, the mood would have been very, very different. I'm not sure that Chloe maybe would have said yes in the same exuberance, because she would have been so disappointed about the game. I've no doubt she would have said yes.
Yeah.
But, you know, yeah, it just added to the enjoyment and the celebrations that they had and everything else. And they'll go into this week really full of confidence, still buzzing from the engagement and the result, you know, and they'll be looking to make it 3 from 3.
Now, you were chatting with Niamh last week about who'd be putting their hand up for that 10 jersey. If you were to pick it tomorrow, and I'm presuming it's out of this bunch here, who would you be going with?
Yeah, look, I spoke to Nicole Cronin before and after the game as well, as captain of Munster, and I actually thought she played a really, really good game at the weekend, controlling her forwards and setting free her backs, and her kicking was much improved as it had been previously. But for me, Dana O'Brien is still the player that we need to put faith in. I thought she had a relatively quiet game and couldn't quite unlock the Munster defence, and knowing Niamh Briggs, I'm sure she targeted Dana O'Brien as a way to, like, if we can shut her down in this game, Leinster will be shut down a little bit, and it worked. But so yeah, look, on that occasion, unfortunately, Dana O'Brien couldn't really work her magic, but I still do think right now she is the form 10 in the country, and she has an awful lot of potential. Her form in the league this year has been incredible. Her place kicking is fantastic and out of hand, and she's a great runner herself, so not only is she a threat personally and individually, but she also has the ability to free up other players. So look, I don't know what Greg is thinking, but based off of previous games, I reckon he'd be looking for a bit of consistency and trying to allow her to develop into that role by giving her game time.
For sure, and no outright showpiece final this year due to the jam-packed kind of schedule. It's amongst these two though, would you imagine? And Munster's slews now at this stage.
Yeah, look, obviously Munster's victory at the weekend has given them 2 wins out of 2, and you know, it's not guaranteed that they're going to win. They have to go to Galwegians this weekend and put in a performance, and on paper and look, obviously on form, they are the team to beat, and they should win this game. But Connacht have been resolute, and they'll be coming off the back of a big win as well. So, you know, it is all to play for. Leinster have to go and do a job against Ulster away from home. Ulster again, while they lost, they will be revived a little bit because it was a much better performance. But with no showpiece final, it is a bit of a disappointment not to see Leinster-Munster again, because I think that again would have been another cracking game. But there's just too much going on. Like, you know, we have the Celtic Cup coming up. The girls probably need a little bit of a break and a couple of camps before going into the Six Nations. And so I can completely understand the reasoning behind it this year.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll jump into that maybe next week. But jumping over to the other game then, as you mentioned, a big win for Connacht, 25-19 over Ulster, where they kind of started off all gung-ho, and Ulster came back into it the second half.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, Connacht went 20-0 up, I think, at one stage. And we talked before about Connacht's, I suppose, the makeup of their squad, and how they have a good chunk that are experienced heads who have international experience and been around the province a very long time, but then they have a massive influx of youth. And what we saw at the weekend was that some of these youngsters really stepping up and putting in big performances, and it was their kind of teenagers who were doing the damage. But great for Connacht to be able to get this win. I think I read somewhere it was their first interprovincial win since the 2019-2020 season, because the last time themselves and Ulster met, it was a 12-all draw. And so obviously they're delighted, because you want to be winning games. It makes playing a lot nicer. And so for them to get that win, I'm sure was absolutely fantastic. You know, Ulster, unfortunately for them, they put in a good performance, but it was probably a little bit too little, too late. That slow start really killed them. But it was great to see them, first of all, get on the board after being held to 0 by Munster in round 1, but also just like they have quality players there. We just never really got a chance to see them. So, you know, I spoke before about Ella Durkin. I think she's a fantastic player and had a really good season for Blackrock. We got to see her a little bit more on the ball. You know, and Beth Cregan, the captain, was fantastic as well. And, you know, it was a really, really good game, like really, really close fought. And the scoreline probably didn't reflect things throughout the game, you know, but for Connacht to go up 20-0 and then for Ulster to not die down, and they really, you know, came back in the second half and got some tries in and didn't give up the fight, is fantastic for them, and they'll take that kind of positive into the last round.
What do you think kind of played into Connacht falling off a bit in the second half? Is that conditioning or experience, or? I'm
not sure, because we saw it in the first game against Leinster too, you know, and it's something I'm sure they'll be looking to work on for next weekend's game against Munster, who they know if they die off a little bit, Munster will do damage. But in the Leinster game in round 1, we saw them putting up this massively physical and resilient defence and keeping out Leinster, I think, until about the 30th, 35th minute. This time, you know, they started really well, so it might be a mix of both things. A mix of that inexperience of those youths not being used to it, might be a little bit of complacency, like, oh, we have this game won, you know, it's not as big a deal anymore. And some of it might just be fitness and fatigue, that they went hell for leather in the first half and they couldn't keep that up. And that's what happens, is that throughout games you cannot go at 100% all the time, and other teams are going to get a purple patch at some point to kind of fight back in, and it's how you control that, I suppose. And they let Ulster back in, they became buoyed, and unfortunately they fell and ran out of time.
As you say though, they did really impress in the first half. I think people were particularly taken with, you know, Mairead Coyne coming through with the kicks, and a lot of members of the squad had extensive carries. Do you think that kind of showcased their versatility in a way? Yeah, absolutely. But I think it also showcases their willingness to work hard. You know, while it is very difficult to defend and not have the ball, like, it's very, very tiring to be continuously asked to carry the ball and chuck it up again, and it takes an awful lot out of you. So to have that forward pack and be willing to continuously do the hard yards and the hard work, and then to have someone like Mairead Coyne who can use those kicks to release all that pressure, it does take it out of you, but it also gives your team that sense of, we're good enough to do this, let's take from this positive stuff, and gives you the confidence to kick on even more. Clara Barrett then with the 2 tries. You were mentioning earlier the teenager. She was only just 18. I think she might be turning 19 this week, I read somewhere. But do you think she's one to keep an eye on for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I spoke about last week about where the beauty of the Interpros is where you see players who have shined throughout the AIL. Can we see if they can step up at this next level? And if they shine here, can they make the step up in the grade to international level too? And look, what we're always looking for is trying to not only obviously produce really good players for the senior team, but also can we have continuously developing young players coming through to keep those pathways open. And Clara Barrett, she was an under-18 international, I think, so she turns 19 tomorrow. You know, it was her first start the weekend, but the weekend before we spoke about her about round 1, she came off the bench and there was that lovely picture of her and Jenny Murphy. And you know, for her to be able to play with her role models and ones that she just looked up to is fantastic. But for her to actually come on or start and have a big performance, score 2 tries, get player of the match, like she probably hasn't stopped smiling since the weekend. But yeah, absolutely one for the future. You know, we're absolutely stacked in back row, but we're never going to say no to more. And I'll be excited to see now how she goes next weekend. I've no doubt she'll retain her place if she's fit. But now that she has scored those tries, she's going to be under a little bit more scrutiny from analysis of other teams. So now it's whether she can continue to put in strong performances and can she adapt her game despite that, I suppose, increased eyes on her.
And Ulster came out swinging then in the second half. What do you think inside of that change? Neil Aircorn's speech must have been something else.
Yeah, it might have been, but also knowing Beth Cregan, you know, she's very passionate and about this squad, and she understands that these girls don't want to go out and get beaten every single week, and that I'm sure she talked a little bit about having a bit of pride in this jersey and you know, this was the opportunity in the game that they were targeting, and she led by example herself, you know, scoring a couple of tries. Another player that's very, very versatile, played hooker in the first game, was playing back row for this game here. And, you know, when you see, like, a great leader isn't just someone who can talk and give a good speech. It's someone who goes out onto the pitch and can also put in the big performances and lead by example in that regard. And she did exactly that. And that probably inspired her teammates around her, particularly those younger girls, to do the same. And look, if she's going to stick her head in there, I'm going to do it too. And you know, it worked, and unfortunately, as I said, they just didn't have enough on the day.
Talk to us though about that first try. Brilliant maul.
Yeah, look, Ulster, their line out in the first game hadn't really functioned very well, unfortunately, but they managed to get things going against Connacht. Fantastic maul. Look, you know, we all know that when a maul gets going, it's very, very hard to stop, you know, and despite the best efforts of the Connacht forwards, with the likes of Laura Feely in there, you know, Grace Brown-Moran as well, like they couldn't even get near it, and it was absolutely trucking down the pitch. And look, Beth Cregan's on the end of it, very, very happy, and sure she's gonna be delighted with that.
And as you say, they're kind of bouncing back now. They're trying to get a bit of momentum going. How much will that bonus point spur them on, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think for all teams at the weekend, you know, some will obviously be happier than others, but regardless of whether you win or lose, there are positives to take from each game, and that's what you need to focus on to be able to bring to the next game. And so, you know, looking at Ulster, the positives are that they finished really, really strongly. They fought for the 80 minutes and got that try right at the end and were rewarded for it. Now can they do that for much longer, and can they, you know, get more penalties or more lineouts so they could use them all to their advantage, which they're strong. Looking at Connacht, they'd be taking the positives of that really strong start, you know, getting the bonus point, but also what they can improve on is, can they sustain this for a little bit longer so they don't drop off? Munster, similarly enough, they'd probably be like, can we not have any yellow cards and can we not keep it as tight? You know, and their discipline wasn't fantastic either, and their handling and stuff like that, so they'd be looking to shore up a few things. Leinster definitely would be looking at discipline and how they can actually finish and execute their chances and get their big players into the game.
And many would argue, of course, that Leinster and Munster would be a touch ahead of Connacht and Ulster maybe. How big do you think that gap is between those two teams and Ulster and Connacht?
Yeah, look, I would agree that there is a bit of a divide between Leinster and Ulster, Leinster, Munster, and then Connacht and Ulster. I touched on last week that Ulster, obviously, they only have one AIL club up in Ulster, and a lot of their players, and it happens with Connacht too, is they lose a lot of their players to other provinces because of their commitments with college and work and everything else, and that can be quite hard for them. But look, the gap is there, but I think Connacht have seen a bit of a resurgence this year. As I said, they've won their first game in a couple of years. They'll be taking massive positives from that. But Ulster probably have a little bit of a way to go, and they have some incredible players there. It's just about developing more and greater depth within that squad to be able to continue to push through, and that comes from having more teams in the AIL, like, you know, and hopefully the structures up there and the pathways can help that and get them back on board.
Yeah, it's interesting from your point of view. A lot of it is to do from the bottom up as opposed to the top down. Obviously, in these games, we're missing quite a lot of the sevens players. They're absent. Do you think that's kind of having a big effect still on the 15s game? Like, there's no quick fix there, really.
Yeah. Oh, look, obviously having been part of both squads and part of both squads at the same time where there have been clashes, you know, from a player's perspective, it's quite difficult because you want to be helping both teams, but you physically can't be in two places at once sometimes, and that's the way it is. And with the sevens players, and it is very well known at this stage, and it's a little bit different now, but back then anyway, it was the sevens players were contracted to the sevens team, so whenever there was a clash, they would go to sevens unless they were told either you're not needed or we want you in the 15 setup at this point. What we saw last year was when they weren't, or they didn't have an upcoming tournament with sevens, that they were released into 15s. Great. The problem with Irish rugby and women's rugby in Ireland at the minute is we don't have the depth and the talent there just yet to be able to have two completely separate squads and to compete and compete well. I'm not saying, like, I'm sure there's a lot of players out there who think they're good enough or might be good enough and haven't been found yet, but we just haven't developed and nurtured that enough to be able to compete with the likes of England and France. Like, we see it in England, they have two completely separate squads from 7s and 15s, and that works for them and they're very, very successful. But when they did that, and a lot of people probably don't know this, is while their 15s team went off to be very, very successful, their 7s team actually dropped off a little bit and suffered from budget cuts and lack of funding, and they actually slipped down the rankings a little bit. And so, like, we can't afford to do that right now, and so the best solution here is when we have our 7s players available, if Greg wants to use them and they want to play, then we use them, and if not, we make do without them. And I'm sure there's plenty of other people around who, you know, want to step up, and that's how other players get their opportunities. And I'm sure we'll see it in this Six Nations. There's bound to be a clash with the Sevens World Series, and so players who maybe wouldn't play in the first couple of games might be getting a chance in the third game, and we might find a superstar.
Yeah, you never know, and Greg McWilliams, I'm sure, will be hoping that happens anyways. But before we jump into the previews, on that, who has stood out to you that maybe people wouldn't be so familiar with over the Interpros that might be included in the Irish squad?
Well, it's not that she won't be familiar to people, but she probably hasn't been involved in the setup in a few years, and that's Dervla Nicovard. I think, you know, I scrolled on Twitter after the game the weekend, you know, I saw a fair few tweets about her, and some people saying she is the most exciting player to watch in Irish rugby, excuse me, male or female right now, because she just has a bit of everything, you know. And she was involved in sevens a few years ago. She got capped with 15s a few years ago at hooker when we kind of had a bit of a shortage with hookers and injuries and stuff like that. She hasn't been involved in a few years, but she absolutely has to be in Greg's squad. He might see her as a little bit too small for an 8, but she has it all. She has speed, she has footwork, she has aggression, she's brilliant at the breakdown. You know, she loves to go quick. Does that work to her disadvantage sometimes? Absolutely, but you know, I just think she's another option that we could have and gives us that versatility. And as I said, she can also play hooker. So, you know, it's worth getting her into camp, having a look at her and see how she goes. But she has been, for me, by far the standout at the weekend. Like, she easily could have been player of the match as well. Like, and that's taking nothing against Maeve O'Leary, who was also fantastic, but Derv has just been brilliant.
Moving on then, and looking ahead to those games, Connacht versus Munster, 1 p.m. the sports grounds on Saturday. Connacht come back off that win against Ulster. Munster looking to claim the title once again. Who do you think comes out on top?
Yeah, look, obviously on paper and in my head and looking at the squad and past form, you know, Munster are the obvious favourites going into that. But having said, Connacht coming off a very big win, they're first in a couple of years, they're at home. You know, the sports ground can be a tough place to go in the swirling wind and depending on conditions. But, you know, unless Munster partied and celebrated a little bit too hard last weekend, I think they should comfortably, not too comfortably, but comfortably get the victory this weekend.
They'll be hoping they're wedded for the win there. Ulster and Leinster then, 5:30, Queen's University Sports Ground. Do you think that's maybe a tough ask now for Ulster?
Yeah, look, again, looking on paper, it is a tough ask, but I suppose while both teams lost last weekend, Ulster are probably the happier team coming out of it, whereas Leinster I'm sure Tanya Ross will find it quite hard to pick up her players this weekend and getting them focused on this, knowing that more than likely the Interpro title is gone. You know, they would have really geared themselves up for that Munster clash, and now they're like, oh, no, again, this is just my opinion, but they might be like, oh, we have another game to play and we can't even win. So this could be an opportunity for Ulster, but I don't think the Leinster players are going to be like that. I do think they're going to come out and want to prove a point that they are a good team and that they can fix a couple of mistakes, and I do think they'll get the win, but yeah, it's a tough one.
And if nothing else, as you were saying, like, there's still that Irish contention to be fighting for.
Absolutely, and that's it. Like, you'll have a lot of players, and we might see Tanya Rosser switch it up a little bit and give players who maybe haven't had a good amount of game time some minutes. And yeah, as you say, like, while the Interpro title may be gone and may not, there is still a chance there to get in a green jersey, and players know that every performance and every chance they're given now, they have to take it because competition is really, really high.
Well, we'll be looking forward to watching those unfold anyways throughout the weekend. That's it for this week's episode of Her Sport's Interpro Rugby Show, brought to you in association with Energia. Think of the possibilities. Tune in next week as we discuss the fallout from the fixtures we've just mentioned, available for you on TG Cahir and BBC iPlayer. My thanks to Hannah for all of your input and analysis there as well, and we'll see you next week.
Her Sports Rugby Show, brought to you by Energia. Think of the possibilities.